The question hung in the air, a shard of ice in the overheated, suffocating space of the apartment. It was a simple question, delivered in the flat, procedural tone of a man who had seen too much to be surprised. But for Alara, it was the final, devastating blow that shattered the last remaining fragments of her reality. "Ma'am," the officer repeated, his voice gentle but firm, pulling her from the disorienting fog of shock. "Did he ever treat you? Did he ever prescribe anything for you?" Around them, her life lay in ruins. Not the tidy, curated life she had so proudly displayed, but the real one, the one that was now exposed as a grotesque imitation. A framed certificate, an elaborate, gold-leafed forgery from a university he never attended, lay on the floor, the glass a spiderweb of cracks radiating from the center. It had been the first thing she'd thrown. Her hand still throbbed from the impact against the wall. The officer's words didn't just ask about medicine. They asked about intimacy, about trust, about every quiet moment of vulnerability she had ever shared with the man she thought she knew. They echoed through the 2 years of her life that now felt like a fever dream. Every headache he'd soothed with a confident touch, every piece of medical advice whispered in the dark, every assurance that he, Dr. Julian Croft, knew exactly what he was doing. The silence stretched, thick with the ghosts of 1,000 lies. Alara looked past the officer, her gaze fixed on the open bedroom door. On the nightstand, she could see a small, amber-colored pill bottle. A simple sleep aid, he'd called it. Something to help with her anxiety, prescribed off-label, a professional courtesy from a colleague. He had been so convincing, so caring. Her protector, her doctor, her love. The officer's question was not just a question. It was an accusation, pointed not at the man who had vanished from her life, but at her own blindness, at the desperate, hopeful part of her that had wanted so badly to believe. And in that moment, the full, crushing weight of the horror wasn't just that he had lied, but that she had let him. She had invited the phantom into her home, into her body, into her soul. She had been his patient in every sense of the word. 2 years earlier, the world had felt like a place of infinite, albeit daunting, possibility. Alara Vance was a woman who built worlds for a living. As a freelance graphic designer and brand strategist, she spent her days crafting narratives from color palettes, logos, and fonts. She gave companies a voice and identity, a story that people could believe in. Her own story, however, felt incomplete. At 32, she was successful, respected in her field, and surrounded by a small but loyal circle of friends. Yet, a profound and persistent loneliness hummed beneath the surface of her meticulously organized life. Her apartment was a testament to her aesthetic, minimalist furniture, a carefully curated collection of art books, and a single, thriving fiddle-leaf fig tree she'd named Ferdinand. Everything had its place. Everything was controlled. Her romantic history was a series of controlled disappointments. Relationships that were pleasant but passionless, convenient but lacking in depth. She had dated artists who were too self-absorbed, finance bros who were emotionally vacant, and one yoga instructor who spoke only in affirmations. Each one had felt like a compromise, a settling. Alara longed for something more. She craved a partner whose life had weight, purpose, and a gravity that could anchor her own creative, sometimes flighty, spirit. She wanted substance. She wanted a man who didn't just talk about changing the world, but who actually did. This longing, this deep, unarticulated ache for meaning, made her vulnerable. It was a void waiting to be filled, and in the digital age, there are endless platforms promising to do just that. Her best friend, Chloe, had been pushing her for months. "You're not going to meet the love of your life rearranging your bookshelf for the 10th time, Elle," she'd said over wine one evening. "You have to put yourself out there." The algorithm knows all. Alara had always resisted. The idea of reducing the search for a soulmate to a series of swipes and filtered photos felt deeply unromantic, a clinical approach to the most beautifully chaotic part of life. But the loneliness was becoming a heavier coat to wear each day. So, with a sigh that felt like a surrender, she downloaded Apex Connect, a dating app that marketed itself to an elite clientele. For professionals who value intellect and ambition, it felt less like a meat market and more like a curated gallery. The profiles were detailed, the pictures were tasteful, and the prompts were designed to elicit thoughtful responses. For a week, she browsed with a detached curiosity, an anthropologist studying a strange new tribe. She saw lawyers in sharp suits, architects standing proudly in front of their creations, and tech entrepreneurs with vague but impressive-sounding job titles. They were all polished, all successful, all interchangeable. She was about to delete the app, reaffirming her belief that true connection couldn't be engineered, when his profile appeared. The name was strong, classic, Dr. Julian Croft. The first photo was disarming. He wasn't looking at the camera, but slightly away, a thoughtful, almost weary smile on his face. He was handsome in a way that felt real, not manufactured, kind eyes, a few stray silver strands at his temples that suggested wisdom rather than age, and the faint lines of exhaustion that only made him more attractive. He was wearing blue scrubs, a stethoscope draped casually around his neck. His bio was concise and powerful. Pediatric surgeon at Northwood General Hospital, dedicated to mending little hearts, both literally and figuratively. When not on call, I'm searching for a quiet corner in a bookstore or a hiking trail with a view. Seeking a partner who understands that a demanding life can also be a deeply rewarding one. It was perfect. It was everything. A man who saved children. A man who read. A man who wasn't afraid of commitment or hard work. He was the antidote to the superficiality she'd grown to loathe. Her heart, a muscle she had long kept in reserve, gave a hopeful, unfamiliar flutter. She hesitated for only a moment, her thumb hovering over the like button. Felt too forward, too eager. But then she reread his bio. A demanding life can also be a deeply rewarding one. That was it. That was the substance she had been searching for. She pressed the button. A few hours later, her phone chimed. It was a match. And then, a message. Alara, your profile mentions you're a brand strategist. I'm fascinated by people who create stories. As a surgeon, I mostly deal with endings and new beginnings. I'd love to hear about the part in the middle. The conversation that followed was unlike any she'd ever had online. It was a seamless flow of intellect, humor, and surprising vulnerability. He asked her about her work, not just what she did, but why. He wanted to understand the psychology behind her designs, the emotional resonance she aimed for. In return, he spoke of his own world with a heavy, compelling grace. He described the immense pressure of holding a child's life in his hands, the quiet triumphs of a successful surgery, and the profound sorrow of the moments when his best wasn't enough. He painted a picture of a life lived at the very edge of human experience, a life of consequence. He was the real thing. He was the anchor she had been waiting for. When he asked her out for a drink at the end of the week, her yes was immediate and absolute. She spent the next 3 days in a state of suspended animation, a giddy, nervous energy thrumming through her. She told Chloe about him, reading his bio aloud like a sacred text. Chloe was happy for her, but a flicker of her inherent pragmatism surfaced. A pediatric surgeon? Wow, that's a lot. Don't get your hopes up too high, Elle. People can be anyone they want to be online. But Alara didn't hear the caution. She only heard the confirmation of his worth. She was already building a brand for him in her mind, a narrative. He was the healer, the hero, and she, finally, was about to step into a story that felt real. Their first date was at a quiet, low-lit cocktail bar downtown, a place of dark wood and hushed conversations. Alara arrived first, smoothing down her silk blouse for the 5th time. Her hands cold with a nervous anticipation she hadn't felt since she was a teenager. When Julian walked in, he was even more compelling in person. He moved with a calm, deliberate confidence, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. The smile that spread across his face was warm and genuine, instantly putting her at ease. Alara, he said, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. You're even more lovely than your photos. The compliment was simple, direct, and it made her blush. The conversation flowed as effortlessly as it had online. He was an incredible listener, leaning in, maintaining eye contact, making her feel as though she were the only person in the room. He remembered small details from their chats: the name of her cat, the title of the book she was reading, her frustration with a particularly difficult client. He made her feel seen. When the conversation turned to him, he was at once authoritative and humble. He spoke about a recent, complicated procedure on a newborn with a congenital heart defect. He used medical terms, transposition of the great arteries, atrial septostomy, with a casual fluency that was mesmerizing. He didn't just say the words. He explained them, breaking down the complex mechanics of the human heart with the ease of a master craftsman describing his trade. He gestured with his hands, sketching invisible diagrams in the air, his passion for his work palpable. "There's a moment," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "right before the first incision, when the entire world just stops. It's just you, your team, and this tiny, fragile life. Everything else fades away. There's a purity to it. A terrifying, beautiful purity." Alara was captivated. This was the depth she had craved. This was a man who lived a life of purpose, who grappled with mortality on a daily basis while she debated the merits of a serif versus a sans serif font. She felt a pang of inadequacy, which she quickly confessed. "My work feels so trivial in comparison," she admitted, swirling the ice in her glass. Julian reached across the table and gently touched her hand. His fingers were warm, his touch steady. "Never say that," he said, his gaze intense. "What you do is important. You create beauty and order in a chaotic world. You give things meaning. It's a different kind of healing, but it's healing all the same. We need that. I need that." In that moment, she was completely and utterly won over. He didn't just validate her, he elevated her. He wove her story into his, making them a complementary pair. The artist and the scientist, the creator and the mender. Their worlds, so different on the surface, were connected by a shared desire to impose order on chaos. The date stretched for hours, but it felt like minutes. As he walked her to her door, a light rain began to fall, slicking the pavement and casting halos around the streetlights. Under the awning of her building, he paused. He didn't lean in for a kiss, which she found endearingly respectful. Instead, he simply looked at her, a soft, almost melancholic expression in his eyes. "I have an early surgery tomorrow," he said. "A 7-year-old with a ventricular septal defect. I'll be thinking of our conversation. It's given me a sense of peace." He thanked her for the evening and walked away, leaving her with the lingering warmth of his touch and the image of a hero heading back into the fray. She went upstairs and leaned against her closed door, her heart pounding a frantic, joyful rhythm. Felt too good to be true. And for a fleeting second, Chloe's cautionary words echoed in her mind. But she pushed them away. This wasn't an online persona. This was a real man with a real, vital job and a real, profound soul. The doubt was a betrayal of the connection she had just felt. She chose to believe. The foundation was laid. Every subsequent interaction was another brick in the solid, unassailable fortress of his identity. Their second date was a walk through an art gallery, where he showed a surprising knowledge of Impressionist painters. Their third was a quiet dinner at her apartment, where he arrived with a bottle of expensive wine and an apology for being 30 minutes late. An emergency at the hospital had held him up. His life as a surgeon became the central organizing principle of their burgeoning relationship. It was the reason for his unpredictable schedule, the cause of his frequent exhaustion, the source of his endless well of compelling, dramatic stories. His phone was a constant presence, buzzing with what he called updates from the ward or consults with residents. He would often have to step away to take a call, his voice low and urgent, laced with medical acronyms she didn't understand but found thrilling. He'd return to the table with a sigh, running a hand through his hair. "Sorry about that. We have a preemie in the NICU who's having trouble stabilizing." He made her feel like an insider, a confidant who was granted a rare glimpse into a high-stakes world of life and death. He never seemed to resent his work. He spoke of it as a calling, a sacred duty. This narrative was intoxicating. It excused every small inconsistency, every canceled plan, every moment of distraction. His unavailability wasn't a flaw, It was a testament to his importance. His exhaustion wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a badge of honor. Alara, the brand strategist, had found the ultimate brand. A man whose very identity was synonymous with heroism, intellect, and sacrifice. She fell in love not just with Julian, but with the entire, beautifully constructed world he represented. He was her safe harbor, her rock, and the cracks in the foundation were so small, so infinitesimally fine, that it would be months before she would even begin to suspect she was living in a house built on sand. The relationship settled into a comfortable, domestic rhythm, albeit one dictated by the demanding, invisible mistress of Julian's career. He began staying over at her apartment more often than not, his presence filling the quiet spaces of her life. He'd leave a toothbrush in her bathroom, a spare set of scrubs, always neatly folded, in her closet, and a worn copy of Gray's Anatomy on her nightstand. These small artifacts were like sacred relics, tangible proof of the life he lived outside her walls. Alara's world began to revolve around his. She learned to cook quiet, nourishing meals that could be reheated when he finally got home from a grueling 16-hour shift. She learned to sleep alone on nights he was on call, his side of the bed feeling vast and empty. She became an expert in deciphering the subtle shifts in his mood, knowing when his silence was due to surgical fatigue and when it stemmed from the emotional weight of losing a patient. He was a master at weaving the fabric of his deception. His stories were rich with detail, populated by a cast of recurring characters. Dr. Albright, the gruff but brilliant head of cardiology, Nurse Ramirez, the fiercely competent and compassionate head nurse in the pediatric ICU, and a host of young, eager residents he was supposedly mentoring. He'd recount conversations, describe hospital politics, and lament the bureaucratic red tape that sometimes got in the way of patient care. It was a fully realized universe, as intricate and believable as any novel. He used technology to his advantage. He'd send her texts from the waiting room, short, tense messages like, "Going in now. Send good thoughts for little Maya." Hours later, a follow-up would arrive. "She's a fighter. Made it through. Long recovery ahead. But she has a chance." Alara would be flooded with relief and pride, her emotional state tethered to the outcomes of these invisible surgeries. She was a partner to a hero, and her role was to be the unwavering support system, the calm port in his storm. She cherished this role. It gave her a sense of purpose that her own life, as successful as it was, had lacked. Yet, beneath the surface of this perfect narrative, tiny, almost imperceptible inconsistencies began to appear. They were like hairline fractures in a flawless vase, visible only if you knew exactly where to look. One evening, he was describing a complex open-heart surgery he'd performed that day. A week later, recounting the same story to Chloe, a key detail changed: the age of the child, the specific defect, the duration of the surgery. When Alara gently pointed it out, he didn't miss a beat. "Oh, right. You're thinking of the Johnson kid from last Tuesday. This was a different case, the Miller boy. They start to blend together after a while, I'm afraid." It's the emotional toll. His explanation was so smooth, so plausible, that she felt foolish for even questioning it. Of course they would blend together. How could she, from her comfortable, low-stakes world, possibly comprehend the pressures he was under? Another time, she asked why she could never seem to find his name on the hospital's website, even in the staff directory. He laughed it off. They're notoriously bad at updating the online records, especially for surgical departments. Besides, a lot of us prefer to keep a low digital profile. It's a safety issue. You wouldn't believe the number of unstable patient families we have to deal with. Again, the answer was logical, even thoughtful. He was protecting himself, protecting them. Each question she had was met with an answer that was not only believable but that actually reinforced the legitimacy of his persona. His lies were not simple denials. They were intricate, layered constructions designed to preempt and neutralize suspicion. The most significant barrier he erected was the one around his colleagues. Despite dating for over a year, Alara had never met a single person from Northwood General. There were no hospital Christmas parties, no after-work drinks with fellow doctors, no casual introductions in the hallway. When she brought it up, Julian became somber. "Alara, my work life is incredibly intense. It's a world of sickness and trauma. The last thing I want to do is bring that world into ours. You are my escape from that. This life we have here, it's separate. It's sacred. I need to keep it that way. This was his masterstroke. He framed his secrecy not as a deception, but as an act of love. He was protecting her from the harsh realities of his job. He was preserving the sanctity of their relationship. To push the issue would be to suggest that she didn't appreciate his sacrifice, that she didn't understand the emotional walls he needed to build to survive. And so, she stopped asking. She accepted the compartmentalization of their lives as a necessary price for loving a man who lived on the front lines of human suffering. She convinced herself that this was what a mature, supportive partnership looked like. She was so invested in the story, so in love with the hero he played, that she willingly ignored the faint, discordant notes in the symphony. She chose belief over evidence, faith over fact. Because the alternative, that this entire, beautiful, meaningful life was a fabrication, was simply too terrifying to contemplate. It was Chloe who first gave voice to the doubts Alara had been so carefully suppressing. Chloe, with her sharp, analytical mind and her healthy dose of cynicism, had always been Alara's grounding force. She had been thrilled for her friend's newfound happiness, but from the beginning, she had maintained a certain professional distance from the myth of Dr. Julian Croft. She had met him several times, at dinners and small get-togethers, and had always found him charming, intelligent, and almost unervingly polished. He's like a character from a TV show, she'd once remarked to Alara. He's too perfect. Doesn't he ever just, have a stupid opinion about a movie or get spinach in his teeth? Alara had laughed it off, defending him. He's just a good man, Chloe. They do exist. The first real confrontation came about 6 months into the relationship. The three of them were having brunch when Julian's phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at it, his face immediately clouding over with a look of grave concern. "I'm so sorry," he said, standing up. "It's the hospital. A multi-car pileup on the interstate, a lot of pediatric trauma coming in. I have to go." He gave Alara a quick, solemn kiss on the forehead and rushed out, leaving a half-eaten plate of eggs Benedict behind. A silence settled over the table. Chloe took a slow sip of her mimosa, her eyes narrowed in thought. "That's the third time he's had to leave us for an emergency," she said, her tone neutral. "Yes," Alara replied, a defensive edge to her voice. "He's a surgeon. It's his job." "I know," Chloe said carefully. "But has he ever introduced you to a single person he works with? Have you ever once just dropped by the hospital to bring him a coffee? You've been to his apartment, twice? And it's practically empty. Doesn't that seem strange to you?" The questions were like tiny, sharp needles pricking at the carefully inflated balloon of Alara's happiness. They were the same questions that had whispered in the back of her own mind, the ones she had always managed to silence. "He keeps his work and his personal life separate," Alara recited, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. "He does it to protect me, to protect us. And his apartment is bare because he's never there. He practically lives at the hospital or here with me." Chloe leaned forward, her expression softening from one of suspicion to one of genuine concern. "Elle, listen to yourself. You're making excuses for him. All I'm saying is, for a man who shares these incredibly intimate, traumatic stories with you, he's remarkably secretive about the mundane details. It doesn't add up. I just want you to be careful." The conversation escalated. Alara felt attacked, her judgment questioned. She accused Chloe of being jealous, of being unable to accept that she had finally found a good, decent man. Chloe, hurt and frustrated, accused Alara of being willfully blind. A rift opened between them that day, a painful chasm of misunderstanding. Alara retreated further into her world with Julian, a world that now felt like a sanctuary she had to defend from outsiders. Julian, sensing the shift, capitalized on it with surgical precision. When Alara tearfully recounted the argument, he held her close, stroking her hair. "I'm so sorry, my love," he murmured. "This is what I was afraid of. People don't understand the pressures of this life. They see it as an inconvenience, a flaw. Chloe is your friend. I know she means well, but she can't possibly grasp what we have. It's easier for her to find fault with me than to accept a reality that's so different from her own. He was a master of psychological manipulation. He didn't forbid her from seeing Chloe. He simply reframed Chloe's valid concerns as a form of ignorance and jealousy. He made Alara feel that their love was a special, elevated thing that others were incapable of understanding. He isolated her not with commands, but with compassion. He made her complicit in her own seclusion. She began to pull away from Chloe and other friends who expressed even the mildest skepticism. Her world shrank until it contained only one person, Julian. He was her partner, her confidant, her hero, and now her sole validator. The echo chamber was complete. Any external voice that might have pierced the illusion was silenced, leaving only his narrative to fill the space. The more isolated she became, the more she depended on him, and the more she depended on him, the more real his fabricated identity seemed. The invisible threat was no longer just the lie itself. It was the psychological architecture he had built around it, an architecture that made Alara its willing and solitary guardian. The deception took a more insidious turn as it began to bleed from the realm of storytelling into the physical reality of Alara's life. It started subtly. She'd complain of a tension headache after a long day of staring at her computer screen. Julian, with an air of professional concern, would gently massage her temples, his fingers pressing on specific points. "You're holding a lot of stress in your trigeminal nerve," he'd say with quiet authority. "You should try taking magnesium before bed. It's a natural muscle relaxant. And make sure you're hydrating properly." The advice was harmless, easily found with a quick internet search, but delivered with his doctorly gravitas. It felt like a prescription. He became her personal on-call physician. When she developed a strange rash on her forearm, her first instinct was to book an appointment with a dermatologist. Julian waved it off. "Let me see," he said, examining her arm under the light. "It looks like a simple case of contact dermatitis. Have you used any new lotions or detergents?" He recommended an over-the-counter hydrocortisone cream, and within a few days the rash faded. His successful diagnosis was another layer of proof, another reason to trust him implicitly. He had saved her a trip to the doctor, a copay, and the anxiety of the unknown. He was not just her partner. He was a provider of care, a guardian of her well-being. This escalation was the most dangerous phase of his deception. He was no longer just impersonating a professional in the abstract. He was actively performing the duties of one, with Alara as his sole, unwitting patient. The psychological control this gave him was immense. He had cultivated a dynamic where she deferred to his judgment not only on matters of the heart but on matters of her own body. The trust she had placed in him was absolute, transcending the emotional and entering the physiological. One winter, Alara came down with a particularly nasty flu. She was feverish, aching, and miserable. Julian sprang into action, transforming into the perfect caregiver. He took her temperature, listened to her breathing with his head against her chest, and provided a steady supply of tea and broth. Her fever spiked one night, and she became delirious, shivering uncontrollably. Panicked, she begged him to take her to the emergency room. He calmly placed a cool cloth on her forehead and took her hand. "No, Alara, listen to me," he said, his voice a steady, reassuring anchor in her fevered state. "Your vitals are stable. Your breathing is clear. Going to the ER now would be a mistake. It's overcrowded, full of much sicker people. You'd be exposing yourself to secondary infections. We can manage this here. I know what I'm doing. Trust me," and she did. She surrendered her fear to his confidence. She allowed his assessment to override her own body's desperate signals. He sat with her through the night, monitoring her, talking to her in a low, soothing voice. By morning, her fever had broken. She woke up weak but lucid, filled with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had been her rock. He had saved her from a traumatic and unnecessary hospital visit. She saw his actions as a profound act of love and care. She couldn't see the terrifying reality. A man with no medical training had made a critical judgment call about her health, a call that could have easily gone the other way. He had gambled with her life to maintain his fiction, and he had won. This incident solidified his role as her ultimate protector. The power imbalance in the relationship became absolute. He was the expert, the authority on life and death. She was the one who needed to be cared for, guided, and protected from the world and from her own anxieties. The invisible threat was no longer just a web of lies. It had become a potential instrument of physical harm, cloaked in the guise of love and concern. Every piece of advice he gave, every pseudo-diagnosis he offered, was a tightening of the psychological chains, binding her more securely to his fabricated reality and isolating her ever more completely from the objective truth. He was her doctor, and she had forgotten how to be her own patient. The first major crack in Julian's carefully constructed world appeared not with a bang, but with a quiet, mundane coincidence. It was a Saturday afternoon in early spring. Alara's parents were in town, and she and Julian were taking them out to lunch at a popular bistro. Her father, a retired engineer named Thomas, had recently undergone a minor heart procedure, and the conversation naturally turned to his recovery. Thomas, a man who dealt in facts and figures, began describing the medication he'd been prescribed, a specific beta blocker. Julian, ever the expert, chimed in. "Ah, metoprolol," he said, nodding sagely. "A good choice, but it can have some significant side effects, like fatigue and dizziness. Did your cardiologist discuss the possibility of switching to a calcium channel blocker? In some patients, especially in your age bracket, it can be more effective with fewer adverse effects." He spoke with his usual confident fluency. But Thomas, who had researched his condition extensively, frowned slightly. "My doctor, Dr. Evans at St. Catherine's, said that for my specific condition, postoperative atrial fibrillation, this beta blocker is the gold standard." He was quite firm about it. "Well, Evans is a fine doctor," Julian said smoothly. "But cardiology is a constantly evolving field. There are differing schools of thought." The conversation moved on, but the moment lingered. It was the first time Alara had ever seen anyone, even politely, question Julian's medical authority. Later that evening, after her parents had left, she found her father's patient care pamphlet on the coffee table. Out of a strange, undefinable curiosity, she picked it up and read the section on his medication. It stated clearly that for his specific condition, metoprolol was the preferred and most effective treatment. Julian's suggestion was not just a different school of thought. It was contrary to established best practices. A cold knot of unease formed in her stomach. It was a small thing, a minor disagreement between professionals. But it was a discrepancy, a verifiable fact that did not align with Julian's narrative. She tried to dismiss it. Julian was a surgeon, not a cardiologist. Maybe he was just a little rusty on this specific pharmaceutical protocol. But the seed of doubt, once planted, began to germinate in the dark, fertile soil of her subconscious. She started to notice things she had previously ignored. One evening, they were watching a medical drama on television. The show depicted a complicated surgical procedure. "That's not right," Julian scoffed from the couch. "They'd never used that type of suture on a bypass. And the clamp placement is all wrong. It's so frustrating how they sensationalize this stuff." He sounded annoyed, an expert critiquing a clumsy imitation. But a few weeks later, Alara was browsing online and stumbled upon a blog written by a real surgeon who fact-checked medical shows. The article she read analyzed the very episode they had watched. The surgeon praised the show for its remarkable accuracy, pointing out that the suture technique and clamp placement were depicted with near-perfect realism. The discrepancy was jarring. Julian hadn't just been wrong. He had been confidently, arrogantly wrong. Why? Was it ego? Or was it something else? The unease grew into a low, persistent hum of anxiety. The incident that truly set the unraveling in motion was another chance encounter. They were at a weekend farmer's market, weaving through the crowds, when a woman's voice called out, "Julian!" They both turned. A friendly-faced woman in her 40s was beaming at them. "Julian Croft, I thought that was you. It's been ages. How are you?" Julian's smile was tight, his posture suddenly rigid. "I'm well, Susan. Good to see you. This is my girlfriend, Alara. Lovely to meet you, Susan said, shaking Alara's hand warmly. I used to work with this one back in the day. Northwood General, right? In the surgical supply department. A deafening silence seemed to fall over the noisy market. Alara looked at Julian, her heart starting to pound. Surgical supply department? Not the surgical department. Julian let out a short, forced laugh. That was a lifetime ago, Susan. I was just a kid then, working my way through med school. I'm in pediatric surgery now. Have been for years. Oh, wow. Good for you, Susan said, oblivious to the tension. That's amazing. Well, it was great seeing you. She waved and disappeared back into the crowd. Julian turned to Alara, his expression a careful mask of nonchalance. Crazy, running into her. I'd almost forgotten about that job. Paid my dues hauling boxes of saline and catheters. God, I feel old. He tried to take her hand, but Alara pulled away slightly. His explanation was, as always, plausible. But it was another patch on a story that was suddenly showing its seams. He had never once mentioned working in supplies. He had always painted a picture of a seamless journey from medical school to residency to esteemed surgeon. This new piece of information didn't fit. For the first time, Alara didn't feel reassured by his smooth explanation. She felt a profound and terrifying sense of dread. The world he had built for her, a world of heroism and purpose, suddenly felt fragile, like a set piece on a stage. And for the first time, she had the terrifying urge to peek behind the curtain. The doubt was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. It kept her awake at night, her mind replaying conversations, searching for inconsistencies, re-examining every story, every excuse. The image of the woman at the market, Susan, was burned into her memory. Surgical supply department, the words echoed, mocking the grand narrative she had so eagerly consumed. For 2 years, she had lived her life according to his schedule, his needs, his reality. Now, she was forced to confront the terrifying possibility that this reality was a lie. The urge to investigate became an obsession, a frantic need to either confirm her fears and shatter her world, or disprove them and restore her faith. It was a terrifying choice. One night, Julian was gone. He was supposedly covering a double shift for a colleague whose wife had gone into labor. It was the perfect story, noble, selfless, and conveniently unverifiable. The apartment was quiet, the silence pressing in on her. She sat on the couch, her laptop open but untouched, her heart thudding against her ribs. She felt like a traitor. She was about to betray the man she loved, the man who had cared for her when she was sick, the man who held her when she cried. But she was also about to betray herself if she didn't. Her fingers trembled as she typed Northwood General Hospital into the search bar. She had been to the website before, of course, but had always accepted his excuse about the outdated staff directory. This time, she was not looking for his name. She was looking for its absence. She navigated to the Find a Doctor portal. She typed in Croft Julian. The screen loaded. No results found for your search, she tried again. Croft J. Nothing. Surgery, pediatric. A list of names appeared. Dr. Annabelle Chun, Dr. Robert Martinez, Dr. Emily Sato, Dr. Benjamin Carter, for pediatric surgeons. His name was not among them. A wave of nausea rolled over her. It was one thing to hear his excuse. It was another to see the cold, digital proof of the omission. But this wasn't enough. Could still be a website error. He could be a fellow, a resident, someone not listed as senior staff. She needed more. Her next search was for the State Medical Licensing Board. Every practicing physician had to be registered. This was not a hospital directory. It was a legal requirement. Her hands were slick with sweat as she navigated the clunky government website. She entered his name and his supposed specialty. She hit enter. The result came back instantly. No records match the criteria you have entered. She did it again, checking the spelling. Nothing. She broadened the search, just his last name. A list of every licensed doctor with the surname Croft appeared. A dermatologist in the city. An ophthalmologist 2 towns over. An internist. There was no Julian. There was no surgeon. The room began to spin. She gripped the edge of her desk, her knuckles white. This was not a mistake. This was not an oversight. A medical license is not something you forget to update. It is the very definition of being a doctor. Without it, you are not a doctor. You are a fraud. The breath left her body in a ragged gasp. The entire edifice of their life together began to crumble. Brick by brick, lie by lie. The late-night calls, the emergency surgeries, the stories of triumph and loss, the medical advice, the stethoscope in his car, the scrubs in her closet. All of it. A performance. A meticulous, 2-year-long performance. But who was he? If he wasn't Dr. Julian Croft, then who was the man who had been sleeping in her bed? She started a new search, a frantic, desperate scrabble for the truth. She used the few concrete details she had, the name of the university he claimed to have attended, the town he said he grew up in. She combined them with his name and then with variations of it. And then she found it, a LinkedIn profile. The picture was of a younger Julian, clean-shaven and smiling, but it was unmistakably him. The name was different, Julian Vance, not Croft. His job title was listed as Regional Sales Manager for MedSurg Solutions, a medical supply company. The woman at the market, Susan. She hadn't been mistaken. He hadn't been working his way through med school. That was his job. He sold medical supplies. He sold the scalpels. He didn't wield them. He sold the scrubs. He didn't earn them. Alara felt a sound escape her throat, a strangled sob of disbelief and horror. She clicked through his profile, his real life laid bare for her to see. He had a degree in business administration from a state college, not an M.D. from a prestigious university. His work history was a series of sales jobs at different medical device companies. It was all there. The truth had been hiding in plain sight the entire time, obscured by the brilliant, blinding light of the lie she had wanted so desperately to believe. The man she loved did not exist. He was a character, a ghost. She had fallen in love with a story, and the author was a stranger named Julian Vance, a medical supply salesman with a business degree. The shock gave way to a cold, terrifying clarity. She thought of the flu, of him telling her not to go to the hospital. He hadn't been making a medical judgment. He had been preventing his lie from being exposed. He had risked her life to protect his fiction. The love she felt curdled into something ugly and venomous. A profound, soul-deep violation. She sat there for hours, the screen glowing in the dark, a silent witness to the complete and utter demolition of her world. When she finally heard his keys in the door, she didn't move. She just waited, the truth sitting like a cold, heavy stone in the pit of her stomach. He walked in, carrying the familiar weariness of a man who had just spent 18 hours saving lives. He dropped his keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, the clatter echoing in the tense silence. He had perfected the performance, every gesture, every sigh. He loosened the knot of his tie, ran a hand through his hair, and turned to her with a tired smile. "Longest day of my life," he began. "We had a neonatal heart transplant that almost went south. But we pulled him through. The little guy's a fighter, the story was ready. Another chapter in the epic of Dr. Croft. But this time the words didn't land. They hung in the air, hollow and absurd. Alara didn't respond. She just sat there on the couch, her face pale, her eyes fixed on him. The laptop was open on the coffee table, the LinkedIn profile of Julian Vance, the medical supply salesman, still illuminated on the screen. The smile faded from his face. He saw her expression, the unnatural stillness, and then his eyes flickered down to the laptop. A flash of pure, animal panic crossed his features. So quick she would have missed it if she hadn't been watching so intently. It was the look of a cornered animal. In that single, unguarded moment she knew for certain. Everything was true. He recovered in an instant, his mask of calm concern snapping back into place. "Elle? What is it? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have," she said, her voice a raw, unsteady whisper. "I've just realized I've been living with one for 2 years." She turned the laptop to face him. The picture of the smiling, younger Julian Vance stared back at him. "Who is Julian Vance?" she asked. The question was quiet, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. He stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. The silence was absolute. For the first time since she had met him, he had no answer. He had no smooth explanation, no plausible story, no psychological trick to deploy. He was exposed, stripped bare under the harsh, unforgiving light of the truth. "Ilara, I can explain," he finally stammered, his voice losing its confident baritone, becoming thin and reedy. "That's an old profile. It's not accurate." "Don't," she said, her voice rising, laced with a fury she didn't know she possessed. "Don't you dare lie to me again. Not now." She stood up, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. "I checked the medical board, Julian, or whatever your name is. There is no Dr. Julian Croft. There is no license. There is no surgeon. There is just you, a salesman, a man who sells scrubs and pretends to be a hero." He flinched as if she had struck him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The entire architecture of his identity had collapsed, and he was buried somewhere in the rubble. "The surgeries," she continued, her voice breaking. "Little Maya, the neonatal transplant tonight. All of it. Was any of it real? Did you just read it in a book? Did you watch it on TV and then recite it to me?" He finally looked at her. His eyes filled not with malice, but with a desperate, pathetic pleading. It started small," he whispered. "On the app. I saw all these guys, CEOs, lawyers. I was just a salesman. I wanted to be someone important, someone you would notice. Someone I would notice?" she repeated, the words dripping with contempt. "So you built a person from scratch? You built a life? A hero? And you let me love him? I did it for you!" he cried, the words exploding out of him. A desperate, last-ditch attempt to reframe his deception as a romantic gesture. "I wanted to be the man you deserved, a man with purpose, a man who did something that mattered. What you did," she said, her voice dropping to a cold, lethal calm, "was a violation. You didn't just lie about your job. You lied about everything, every touch, every word of comfort. You played God with my health." She pointed a shaking finger at him. "The flu. When I was sick, I begged you to take me to the hospital, and you told me not to go. You let me lie there, feverish and delirious. Why? Not because you were making a medical decision, but because you knew a real doctor would expose you in a second. You were willing to let me get sicker, maybe even die, to protect your pathetic little secret." The accusation hung between them, ugly and undeniable. It was the final, most horrific truth. His deception wasn't just a fantasy. It was a weapon that he had aimed at her vulnerability. The confession, when it came, was not a dramatic monologue. It was a pathetic, whimpering collapse. He sank onto the edge of the armchair, his head in his hands, and sobbed. He told her everything. He told her about his deep-seated feelings of failure, his crushing inadequacy. He had always dreamed of being a doctor but had failed out of his pre-med courses in his first year of college. He had spent his entire adult life feeling like a disappointment, selling the tools of a trade he desperately wished he could practice. The lie had started as a small vanity on a dating profile, but when she responded, when she looked at him with such awe and admiration, it had spiraled out of control. He became addicted to the respect, the love she gave to the man he was pretending to be. He read medical journals, watched surgical videos, and memorized terminology to make his performance more convincing. He had lived in constant, abject terror of being discovered. The man sitting before her was not a monster. He was something far more pitiable. A weak, broken man whose desperate need for validation had led him to commit a monstrous act. But his weakness was not an excuse. His pain did not absolve him of the damage he had caused. Ilara looked at the weeping stranger in her living room, and she felt nothing. The love had been burned out of her, replaced by a cold, empty void. "Get out," she said, the words falling like chips of ice. "Get your things and get out of my life." He looked up, his face streaked with tears. "Alara, please." "Now," she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat, raw and primal. It was the sound of 2 years of suppressed doubt, of betrayed trust, of a heart breaking not with sadness, but with the violent force of pure rage. He scrambled to his feet and rushed into the bedroom, grabbing his few belongings. As he hurried past her towards the door, he stopped. "I really did love you," he whispered. Alara stared at the wall behind him, her expression unreadable. "You don't even know me," she replied. "And I have no idea who you are," he left, closing the door softly behind him. The click of the latch was the final sound of her old life ending. She stood alone in the silence of her apartment, surrounded by the props of his elaborate stage play. She walked over to the framed diploma on the wall, the one he had proudly hung, a testament to his fictitious achievements. With a guttural cry, she ripped it from its hook and hurled it against the opposite wall. The sound of shattering glass was the first honest sound she had heard in a very long time. The aftermath was a slow, disorienting crawl through a landscape of wreckage. The initial, explosive rage gave way to a profound, hollow shock. Alara moved through her apartment like a ghost, touching objects that now seemed alien to her. The coffee mug he used every morning, the throw blanket they had shared on the couch, the books on medicine he had left behind. Each one was a relic from a life that had never existed, a museum of a grand deception. The full scope of the violation began to dawn on her in terrifying waves. It wasn't just the lie about his career. It was the complete infiltration of her life. He had advised her on financial decisions, on conflicts with friends, on her own health. Every memory was now tainted, every moment of intimacy retroactively poisoned. Who was the man she had shared her deepest secrets with? Who was the man whose body had been next to hers in the dark? She felt a desperate, urgent need to purge him from her space. She gathered every item he had ever given her or left behind. Clothes, books, gifts, and stuffed them into black trash bags. It was a frantic, cleansing ritual, but it offered little relief. The lies were not in the objects. They were embedded in her memory, in the very fabric of the past 2 years. The police became involved not because she called them, but because a neighbor, hearing the smash of glass and her primal screams during the confrontation, had dialed 911 fearing a domestic dispute. When the officers arrived, they found Alara alone, sitting on the floor amidst the debris, a shattered woman in a shattered home. It was then that the officer asked the question that would haunt her for months. "Ma'am, did he ever treat you?" The question forced her to confront the most terrifying aspect of the betrayal. He had played doctor with her life. She made an appointment with her actual physician the very next day, a visit steeped in shame and humiliation. She had to explain that for 2 years, her primary source of medical advice had been a medical supply salesman. She had to list every ailment, every piece of advice, every over-the-counter remedy he had suggested. The doctor was kind but firm, ordering a full panel of blood tests and a complete physical. "We need to establish a baseline," she explained gently. "We need to make sure no real damage was done." The waiting period for the results was agonizing. Alara's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if the rash he'd dismissed was an early sign of something serious? What if the supplements he'd recommended had been harmful? What if his confident management of her flu had masked a more dangerous underlying condition? She was lucky. The tests came back clear. Physically, she was unharmed. But the psychological toll was incalculable. Her trust in her own judgment was completely obliterated. How could she have been so blind? So gullible? The questions circled endlessly, a vulture's patient vigil over her self-worth. Friends rallied around her, Chloe chief among them. There were no "I told you so's," only unwavering, compassionate support. Chloe simply held her while she cried, brought her food she wouldn't eat, and sat with her in silence when the words wouldn't come. The rift between them healed, but it was a scar that served as a permanent reminder of how effectively Julian had isolated her. The legal system, meanwhile, began to move. Julian Vance was not hard to find. He was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including fraud and practicing medicine without a license. The story, with its sensational, dramatic elements, was picked up by local news outlets. Alara's name was kept private, but the details were salacious enough to create a minor media storm. She became an anonymous object of public fascination and, inevitably, of judgment. The comments section of every news article was a cesspool of victim blaming. How could she not know for 2 years? She must be an idiot. She probably liked the idea of dating a doctor and didn't want to look too closely. Sounds like she's just as fake as he is. Each comment was a fresh stab of shame, reinforcing her own worst fears about herself. She had wanted the story to be true. She had wanted the hero. And that desire, she now believed, had made her a fool. She was forced to give a statement to the district attorney, a process that required her to recount the entire 2-year relationship in excruciating detail. Sitting in a sterile office, under the flat, fluorescent lights, she had to verbalize the intimacy, the trust, and the eventual horrifying discovery. Saying it all out loud made it feel both more real and more absurd. The man she described sounded like a sociopath, a monster. But the man she remembered, the man who had held her hand and whispered that he loved her, was still tangled up in the performance. That was the most difficult part to reconcile. The lie was monstrous, but the man behind it had seemed so very human. The story of Alara and Julian is not just a story about a clever con man and a naive woman. It is a cautionary tale about the nature of belief, the seductive power of a good story, and the deep, universal human longing for connection. In our modern world, we have become masters of personal branding. We curate our lives on social media, we build professional personas on networking sites, we present carefully edited versions of ourselves on dating apps. We tell stories, and we consume them. Julian Vance was not an anomaly. He was an extreme manifestation of a culture that often values appearance over substance. He understood, perhaps better than most, that if a story is compelling enough, people will want to believe it. He didn't just sell Alara a lie. He sold her a narrative that fulfilled her deepest emotional needs. He offered her a story in which she was the cherished partner of a hero, a participant in a life of meaning and consequence. Her desire to believe him was not a sign of foolishness, but a sign of her humanity. She was a hopeful seeker, a woman looking for an anchor in a chaotic world, and he presented himself as the perfect harbor. The antagonist in this story was not merely Julian. It was the invisible threat of deception itself, an insidious force that preys on our vulnerabilities. It thrives in the spaces where we are lonely, where we are insecure, where our desire for a certain reality is stronger than our commitment to the truth. Technology was his accomplice, allowing him to construct and maintain his facade with an ease that would have been impossible a generation ago. A few carefully chosen photos, a well-written bio, and a series of convincing texts were enough to build the foundation of a completely fictitious life. His crime was not just fraud. It was a form of profound psychological theft. He stole 2 years of Alara's life. He stole her ability to trust. He stole her memories, retroactively corrupting every moment of happiness with the poison of his deception. The wounds he left are not the kind that can be seen on an X-ray or stitched up in an emergency room. They are the invisible, internal injuries to the soul, the kind that leave a person forever altered. As for Julian, he was exposed not as a Machiavellian genius, but as a man hollowed out by his own feelings of inadequacy. His entire life was a performance driven by a desperate, childlike need for applause. He built a cage of lies and then trapped himself inside it, living in constant fear of the day the lock would break. The horror of his actions does not negate the pathos of his motivation. He was a broken man who, in trying to mend his own fragile ego, shattered the life of another. This story forces us to turn the lens inward, to examine the narratives we accept in our own lives. It asks us to confront the uncomfortable truth that trust is always a leap of faith, and that sometimes we land on unstable ground. The world is full of stories. We use them to make sense of our lives, to connect with others, to find our place. But we must be discerning consumers. We must be willing to ask the hard questions. to look for the inconsistencies, to listen to the nagging voice of doubt, even when the story is one we desperately want to be true. And so, we leave Alara not broken but rebuilding. The process is slow, painful, and uncertain. She is learning to trust again, starting with the most difficult person of all, herself. She is learning that her own story does not need a hero to have meaning. Her own life, with all its quiet, unglamorous truths, is enough. And we are left with a question, one that echoes the officer's query in that shattered apartment. But this one is not for Alara. It is for you. How well do you truly know the people you let into your life? What parts of their story have you accepted without question? Simply because they were beautiful, because they were comforting, because you wanted them to be true. We are all, in our own way, searching for a story to believe in. Just be sure that the story you choose is built on a foundation of truth, not on the shifting sands of a beautiful and devastating lie.